Welcome to the Living After Faith podcast, here to help you recover from the damage of religion and move forward with your life, putting the emphasis on living after faith. This is the official podcast of recoveringfromreligion.org. Now with today's program on Living After Faith, here's Rich and Deanna Joy Lyons.
I'm Rich Lyons.
I'm Deanna Joy Lyons.
Come laugh with me.
Today our guest is Robert Parham. Now I suppose we should probably preface this with a little disclaimer. This was actually recorded about a year ago in our closet when we kind of first moved into the recording in the closet days.
This was one of those that I didn't know what to do with. It's a longer format. It goes a full hour. Very touching discussion that we had. But at that point, I was thinking more like a radio guy than a podcaster. I was thinking we really need to keep it down to 20 minutes so that people can listen in their car on their way to work and hear the whole program. And I really didn't understand the dynamic of how people listen to podcasts. People have told us we want it longer, we want more, tell more of the stories, you're cutting out things that we want to hear. And I got your message. I understand. I'm like, okay, I'm thinking quick, short, tight, bam. And people want to hear the story. They want to hear people talk. So I'm glad I didn't push it out the door a year ago, because I would have cut so much out of the program. Well, I couldn't have done it. And that's why I didn't do it. I just couldn't do it justice in that amount of time. Recently, Robert contacted me and he said, what are you going to do with that? I thought, we're doing things different now. And I pulled it up and started listening. And you've heard the interview, Deanna. It's incredible.
It's really beautiful. It's really touching. There's an intimacy to it. This was really one of those things where when you have a project to do and you can't figure out how to do it, you put it in the back of your mind and you go, someday I'm going to figure out how to do that thing. But for now, I just can't. It's not going to work. And, now we've been able to do it for a while. We switched over to longer formats quite a while back, but it remains in that bin in your head that's like, this is going to be hard. So I'm really glad that we got to do this. It's beautiful.
It starts out kind of slow and you get into a lot of background. Robert was a minister and he tells but you have to have that part of the story to understand where he goes. And he shares some intimate things that are, they're going to make you touch some emotions. So be expecting that. But I guess what I'm saying is don't let the slow pace turn you off. You got two Southern talking guys who talk slow, but don't let that turn you off. Listen to the words and listen to the story, because there's a huge amount of emotion in it. And I think it's going to touch some things that most of our listeners have either experienced, thought about, wondered about. And it's going to be one of those episodes that brings you to a place where you have some things to think about when it's done.
Yeah, there are a couple of things that struck me in this, in similarity to Rich's story. Robert's reasons for deconverting started with those emotional reactions to a sense of unfairness, a sense of cruelty in the religion that he was in.
Good people who
want to be good to other people
and aren't welcome.
Yeah.
You can't be who you are, where you are.
Yep. And that's one of the big themes. And the other theme, which is one we've also explored, is the more you learn about your religion, other religions, other cultures, the less you believe in the literalness of it. So a lot of you, I'm sure, will be familiar with these themes in the story today. It's really good stuff.
I appreciate Robert bringing it to my attention that we still had this out there, because in the back of my mind, I knew that. But when he said, what are you going to do with that? And I thought, we can do something with that now. And I'm glad we did. I think it's going to be an episode that people are going to want to listen to. You're going to recommend it to some of your friends. I even think that you're going to want to recommend it to some of your theist friends, if for no other reason than helping them understand some of the things that most theists just plain can't understand because their mind hasn't gone there. They haven't thought about those things. And when they start thinking about those things, I'm not saying it's going to deconvert people. That's never my intention or goal. But I think it's going to make people accept you in a different light.
I think any sense of understanding each other better, especially, if it's a story that you can identify with a bit and show to someone else to explain how you feel and what you went through. Never a bad thing. Here's Rich's interview with Robert Parham.
He is in the Pacific Northwest Tacoma area, right, Robert?
Correct. Actually, a little bit east of Tacoma, southeast in South Hill, Puyallup. But I work in Tacoma. That's where my office is.
A little bit about his background, a minister for a long time, now an atheist. And what we're going to talk about today is the process that he went through, leaving the ministry, becoming an atheist, and how life is today. That's what we do on Living After Faith. So tell us a little bit about your ministry, your involvement in ministry, and how all that worked to you in the particular time in your life.
Okay, well, I grew up in the church, in the Southern Baptist Church. I'm from the South, from Alabama.
I was hoping we'd eventually get a good Southern Baptist on.
Yeah, and some people tell me that, you don't sound like from the South. I can sound like I'm from the South.
I don't know what you're talking about. I can't do that anymore.
Yeah, Texas, right?
Right.
Yeah. So, I grew up in Alabama, in the South, in the Bible Belt, and Southern Baptist churches down there are like Starbucks are up here. There's one on every corner. But having grown up in the church and having a very strong influence from especially my grandparents, I think that, it's probably as early as maybe 14, I started to feel like God had something special planned for me, And so it took a few years, but my interest at the time was music, and ended up actually my church, and this is how it's done in the Southern Baptist Church, is the pastor of the church and the other leadership of the church met with me, talked with me, felt like from what they had observed that they agreed with me that God had a plan for me that involved the ministry. So I was licensed as a Southern Baptist minister at the age of 17.
Wow. That's young, especially licensed. I mean, that's a big piece of paper for someone with not many years.
It is. I think that part of it was that I had already shown, even at that age and before, a lot of leadership in my youth group, from leading Bible studies to actually, leading worship as the youth choir director, periodically, not on a consistent basis. We always had a yearly youth Sunday where the youth of the church filled all the positions in the church, and that was always something we looked forward to. And I had filled the position of the music minister as well as the pastor during that time. But I think that they just observed in me that my faith was something that was important to me, to say the least, and they recognized that leadership ability even at that age. And I actually started serving my first church at the age of 17. My home church was a fairly large church in Decatur, Alabama, and they began a mission church out on the highway that was in this kind of prefab building that had a steeple and was located on some property right next to several mobile home parks. And we had a retired missionary who was a member of our church who volunteered to be the pastor. And they needed someone who would come and, lead hymns, sing some songs. And I thought, this is the perfect opportunity for me to get started doing what I feel like God wants me to do. And so that's what I did. So at the age of 17, I was the minister of music of the small mission church.
That's a lot of responsibility. I mean, we're talking a high school kid here, right?
Yeah. I was still, I started the summer before my senior year, and did it all through high school, and was very involved in music in the high school, singing in the concert choir and the male chorus. And so I had a lot of friends who also sang. So this little mission chapel that probably at the height of the numbers of people who attended probably was only about 20 or 25 people on a given Sunday. Probably had some of the best music of any church in the area, because I was drawing on all of my contacts.
Sure.
From my home church, from all of my friends at school who, went to other churches.
So you weren't slacker.
Oh no. I was, and that's just it. When you're first getting started, you're very motivated and you want to do the best that you can do. And so that was my mentality, is that I don't care how small this little mission church is. We're going to do things right. I'm going to try to do the best that I can do with what I have available. And so we did some really neat things with the music in this little church. Even talking about it now and reflecting, I don't know if you can tell, but I do still feel, a little, some pride.
Should be.
In that.
Yeah. It's part of your life, and you gave a lot of yourself to it. And
definitely.
There's no reason to look back at it with anything other than some pride and understanding that, wow, 17-year-old kid, and I pulled this off.
Yeah. I was very proud of myself at the time, and I guess I still am. I think having made the the transformation to the person I am today in terms of my thinking, I can't help but be a little conflicted. It's like I am proud of what I accomplished, but at the same time, I do have a little bit of resentment about what I accomplished as well.
Exactly. What happened then? You're 17 years old. Where'd it go from there?
Well, I knew at the time that, the ministry was what I was supposed to do. That's how I felt. It's what I believed, that it was God's call. So I was kind of a mediocre student in high school. And so I decided that out of necessity, really, if I was going to go to college, I was going to have to start out, even though I did well on the ACTs, most of the schools in the South, you could take either the SATs or the ACTs. And I took the ACTs and did well enough to get into pretty much any public school and a lot of private schools, but my GPA in high school still was not that great. Wasn't sure I was going to pay for it. I came from a family that just didn't have money. We always lived from paycheck to paycheck. So I decided to move to Birmingham with a buddy of mine who was already there, and went to a community college in Birmingham, Jefferson State Community College. Ended up changing my major to music, and getting a full scholarship for voice for singing in their public relations group. And from there transferred to Samford University in Birmingham, which is a Southern Baptist university. Originally wanted to go to Belmont College in Nashville because they had a more contemporary music program, including lots of sound production, studio production programming, and I was very interested in that. But they didn't have near the scholarship money available. So I went to Samford, where any ministerial student, whether it's a major in religion or church music or whatever it is, gets 40% off tuition right off the bat. That combined with money from the State Baptist Association, and a couple of other scholarships, including a voice scholarship, I was able to manage it, and paid for the rest through student loans. So yeah, I spent even at the community college, I was the president of what was then called the Baptist Student Union. It later they changed the name to Baptist Campus Ministries. I'm actually not sure what they call it today.
Right.
But I was the president of that organization on campus. Did a lot of other things, as a student there. But then when I got to Samford, I was so busy between having to work a full-time job at a local independent Christian television station, as well as serving churches as minister of music or youth, all through undergrad. So I was a very, very busy person. I didn't have time anymore for being involved in campus ministries or anything. It was tough. It was a very tough time. But I did it and got my degree in church music. From there, it was interesting because I had just taken an interim position at a fairly large church in North Alabama as their minister of music. And I was commuting every Sunday up to this church. So it was about an hour and a half to 2 hour drive to get there. And what happened was they, right shortly after I got there as their interim, the pastor resigned. And so every effort to find a full-time minister of music stopped. And I'm sure you're aware that that's pretty typical. You know, you don't want to hire a new staff member who's beneath the pastor when you don't have a pastor. You want to fill that position first, and the pastor is going to want to have a say,
Yes.
you know, in who, you know, their staff is going to be. So I ended up being the interim there for a year. And what happened is that being the interim, and this is kind of a reflection back to what I was saying earlier about the little mission church, is it didn't matter to me, you know, if I was part-time and interim, how much I was being paid. That didn't matter. I was going to do it all out. I was going to do it 100%, or I wasn't going to do it at all.
Right.
So I was doing some major productions for Christmas and Easter with this fairly large choir. I mean, I felt like, you know, I've got an opportunity to do a lot of the things that I want to do here because it was a large church with a large choir and lots of resources. So that's what I did. And what happened is that the choir fell in love with me and started this little behind-the-scenes campaign, I found out later, to try to get the search committee to hire me full time. But the problem is that they didn't have a pastor.
Didn't have a pastor, sure.
And then the second problem was that when they had initially lost their minister of music and made some decisions about their search, one of the things that the church had voted on was that they were only going to consider people who already had a master's in divinity. And I hadn't even graduated yet with my bachelor's in music. So that was out of the question. It wasn't going to happen. And so after a year of being the interim and seeing that it was really taking some time for them to find a pastor, and I had graduated, I decided, well, I can't, you know, I cannot just hang out here as the interim, and I have my degree now. I want to put some feelers out and see if there's some interest. And it took about a month for a church to come and interview me and see me and bring me to them. And so I left there and went to another church, fairly good-sized church, as combo minister of music and youth, full-time minister of music and youth. So that was my first full-time church gig. And then some really interesting things happened. But I want to preface it by saying that this was still at a time, all of this was still at a time where my faith was solid. And I was still very conservative in my faith. Because I think sometimes people, when I start to talk about being an atheist now, there's this preconceived idea that I think a lot of Christians have. I know I did, that something must have happened. What happened?
Right.
That turned you off? You know, how did you get hurt?
Right.
And it was nothing like that, but I could see how telling this next story, people would say, aha, see,
that's where it
happened. But it wasn't, I was solid through all of this.
Yeah.
But I went to this full-time church and was so excited, had my degree. It's my first full-time job. They actually had 2 houses. And so the pastor had the pastorium and I had the other house, so part of the package was that I had a 3-bedroom house.
Nice.
And what made it even nicer was that I had a fiance. And so she was pretty stoked about it too, that here we were, 25 years old, I guess, at the time. And, we were trying to, figure out when we were going to get married, and we have a house, just like that. We have a house. And so what happened was, this was in 1993. And right after, within a month, maybe 2, but I think it was within a month, the pastor disappeared, literally vanished. Okay. I got a phone call from the chairman of deacons letting me know that the pastor, that nobody could find him, that nobody could get in touch with him. His wife could not find him, get in touch with him. Everybody was freaking out, because they were worried something bad had happened. Nobody could find him. And so people were driving, calling all, different people. Have you seen him? Well, there was a note. And once they found the note basically directed them to where the car would be.
Oh.
And so he had driven down the highway, left the car parked underneath an overpass, and basically in the note just said, I'm not coming back. Don't even bother, looking for me, because I'm not coming back. And now that, and this was in the letter, now that Robert is here, he can help with, filling the gap and with filling in while the church finds a new pastor. Gave directions to the chairman of deacons about forming a pastor search committee. It's very specific and laid out. Well, what ended up happening is that about 3 or 4 days later, I can't remember who got a phone call from him and saying that he was in Vermont, and that he wanted to come home. And so the plan was to meet him at the Birmingham Greyhound bus terminal, which is about, an hour away. But he didn't show up. He told him, I'll be arriving tomorrow night, which was interesting because he was in Vermont. And I don't know, most people who've ever ridden a Greyhound bus.
Takes a little longer than that.
Yeah. It takes a long time to get anywhere on a bus because you stop everywhere.
Yeah.
Along the way. And so that was a little suspicious. And the second thing that was suspicious was the fact that he wasn't there when they went to pick him up. And later, late in the middle of the night, he was spotted walking down the highway towards town. His story was that he actually went to Montgomery, which didn't make any sense because he would have had to have stopped in Birmingham on his way to Montgomery. So none of his story made any sense. So needless to say, there was a huge controversy now within the church, and half the church were, we need to just love him, bring him back, and everything will be okay. And the other half of the church would say, well, we love him too, but there needs to be some accountability here.
Yeah.
He needs to account for what in the world has happened and why. And, he owes us that.
Right.
So I was stuck in the middle. Here I am, newly graduated, my first full-time gig as a minister in a church, 25 years old, and I'm in the middle of all this. I'm the only other full-time staff member at this church, part-time secretary. It was tough. And my wife, who we had just gotten married, in the midst of this, says to me, I'm not doing this. She said, I know that this is where you're working. I will not set foot in the doors of this church again. And there was a part of me, of course, that felt like, oh my gosh, what am I going to do? How am I going to explain this? But the other part of me completely understood.
Yeah.
That here she is, a newlywed, a minister's wife, and this huge controversy is not what she...
Not what she bargained for.
No, not at all. And she had never experienced anything like that in her life. So I didn't know what to do other than I've got to save my marriage. So I resigned.
It's actually a good call.
I immediately, when she told me that, started looking for anything I could find because I needed a job. So as soon as I found a part-time church, and I told them, I was very upfront about what was going on and the situation, and it was part-time, small church back in Birmingham. And so I did. As soon as that, became firm, I resigned and left in the middle of all of this controversy. But my marriage, which was only, 3 months old, didn't recover. I think a lot of it was I started to feel resentment at the time,
She was calling your shots.
She was.
And in a ministerial perspective, your thought is only God can make these decisions.
It was.
And you're choosing to be God in this.
Yeah, and I thought, it's just my personality type too, I think, is that I would, if I hadn't been married, you better believe I would have stayed because I saw that as my responsibility. It's my responsibility to be here for this church. They need me. It was tough. That was probably the hardest thing I've ever done in my life. At the time, of course, because of where I was spiritually, my faith, so it was difficult, very difficult, and our marriage didn't make it. So it was probably, one of the shortest marriages on record, because it literally lasted 6 months. That's how long it lasted. We got down there and we tried to do marriage counseling, but she had that experience did it for her, and there was no changing her mind about it. She's like, I am not going to be a minister's wife.
Let's look forward a bit. What led you out? Describe that process.
Well, in a way, it was the experience there that led to it, because it was the catalyst for it. And this is why. As a minister of youth, and I'm sure, in your experience as a pastor, this as well, you do a lot of counseling.
Yeah.
And so I was doing a lot of counseling of teenagers and parents, with their issues, and felt completely inadequate in what I was doing. I already had this sense that, my knowledge of the Bible and what I think, God, would want with people isn't enough. I don't really feel like I know what I'm doing. So I decided while I was at that church, because the University of Alabama was only 45 minutes away, I was going to go to grad school and get a degree in counseling, but not to use, in a new career, to use in my work in the church.
Yeah, to improve.
Sure. Right, to improve my skills.
Very noble, by the way.
And that's just how I was, And so So when I left that church and went back to Birmingham, that was already my plan. The only thing that changed was instead of going to the University of Alabama, I went to the University of Alabama, Birmingham, to UAB. And, so I started that within a year after leaving that church. But being part-time and everything wasn't enough. I mean, I couldn't live on it. I needed another job. And so I actually started painting. There was a painter in the church who offered me a job. And so I was painting full-time and serving this church part-time and going to graduate school. And that is when things started to change for me. It was graduate school. The loss of my marriage, it depressed me, obviously, because my biggest concern was as will a church have me now that I'm divorced? But my faith was not shaken at that point. It was graduate school. It was studying about psychology and studying about cultural diversity. And probably the first time that I really had a challenge to my belief system, not my faith, but my beliefs about things, was in a class on cultural diversity. We were instructed that we were going to do a project. And that project involved each of us figuring out some group of people who are different from us. And we were told that, I want you to challenge yourself. I want you to think about what particular group would be the most challenging for you personally. Well, that was obvious for me. It was easy. I knew right then and there which population would challenge me the most. The gay community.
Yeah.
Right?
Sure.
I'm conservative Christian, Southern Baptist. Part of the belief is that being gay is a choice. It's sinful behavior, and according to the Bible, it's an abomination to God. And unless they change their ways, they're going to go to hell. You can't be gay and be a Christian.
Exactly.
Was the
That's
belief.
Bible.
Right. So I'm like, that's what's going to challenge me the most. And I was a painter, came across this person that I can't remember how, but I somehow had known that they were gay. And I had done, it was while I was doing some work for them as a painter. So I'm like, well, I'll call him. And it was that project of sitting down with a gay man and listening to his story about what it was like for him as a teenager, knowing he was gay, as an adult in college, knowing he was gay, and he was a teacher. And in the South,
wow,
you can't be out.
No.
I mean, maybe it's changed some now. I don't know because I don't live there
Somebody's
anymore.
daddy going to pop you.
Yeah, I mean, at the time, certainly he had to stay in the closet because he would probably lose his job. Discrimination based on sexual orientation was not.
Yeah.
That was not a part of the.
That wasn't a problem.
No.
Yeah.
So anyway, the one thing I think that I got from that project that made the biggest difference for me and started to challenge me was this one statement that he said, and I remember it to this day, and because of how much of an impact it made on me. After he got through telling his story about all of the trials and hardships and difficulties, the fear that he lived with, he says to me, now I want to ask you something. Like, okay? He said, why would anyone choose that? Why would anyone choose in this culture and climate to be gay. He's like, he was telling me how it is so frustrating for him that people think that this is a choice, when a person would have to be completely masochistic to choose this, and to be open about it. At least in that world. Yeah. And that hit me like a ton of bricks, because I was in graduate school and my thinking was being stretched, and I at that point, I almost didn't even have a choice. I had to just allow myself to realize how much sense that made.
Yeah.
And the next thing that happened was, and this really blew my mind, was that and I can't say who it was, because he needs his anonymity, but I had a very, very dear and close friend who was married and had kids and, had gone through a really difficult time. He was a minister and had to leave the church because of it. I know I'm being vague, but I kind of have to be. Confided in me that he was gay.
And why would he choose that? Why would he choose to lose his marriage, to lose his ministry, to lose the relationship with his kids?
And that's just it.
That had to be ringing in your mind.
Well, the thing is that he didn't.
Right.
He didn't choose to lose any of that. He chose to keep it to himself. And eventually he did confess to his wife about it. But his belief was the way mine was. So basically his belief about himself was that he was an abomination. He literally has been killing himself slowly over the years, and literally actually attempted to kill himself several times, because of what I think is just his ongoing inner torment and torture, of I believe one thing, but I am something else, and I can't stop it, no matter how hard I try. So, many, many physical ailments and problems from all of that stress and depression, all the drugs, even ECT, electroconvulsive therapy. None of it ever worked, So I've watched from a distance my friend deteriorate over the years and have had to just make sure he knows that if there's nobody else in his life, that he's got one person, that accepts him and loves him for who he is. And that's all that I've been able to do for him. But it's one of those things that at that time just rocked my whole foundation of my faith, because I could not, reconcile because my belief was also that God creates us. Okay, we are God's creation, and God would not make you gay. Okay, He's not going to make you that way. That is your choice to be gay. So this completely, turned that upside down. But it just made no sense. I came to this realization that, in fact, for the vast majority of people who are gay, it's not a choice. It is who they are, either genetically, or, yes, through some of their early life experiences that kind of molded and shaped them into who they are, and, yes, their sexuality. But that's no different than any of us in any other part or aspect of our life. Our early experiences may shape who we are and how we are with people, but that is who we become.
Right.
And it isn't a choice. So I had to accept that, which meant I had to consider that the Bible was not inerrant, infallible, the Word of God. And that's where it all started.
That's a beautiful story. It's painful. I see the tears.
Yeah.
The listener can't see those.
He's my friend.
Yeah.
You know, and what I can't do is I can't share what I would love to share that would really help the listener understand.
Confidentiality, and
yeah,
I
just
don't want to break that at all.
Yeah, but it's hard because it's hard for me to be able to express just how important this person was in my life, without saying too much. And
Let's move forward a little bit. You had a heartbreaking experience. Your question came down kind of similar to mine, the character of God. If he's creating people like this just to torment them, then I don't want anything to do with that.
Yeah.
And by the other hand, if he's not, then the Bible's wrong.
Right.
And I can't have anything to do with that. So being an atheist today is not a choice either.
Oh, no, it absolutely isn't. You know, and the thing is that I didn't go from that set of experiences to, okay, I don't believe the Bible anymore. That's not how it happened. I had to alter my understanding of the Bible. Okay. And so I began reading primarily John Shelby Spong, who is an extremely liberal, progressive, former Episcopalian bishop from the Newark Diocese. And he's written many, many books. So I started reading him and found a church. So I had left that part-time church and was still painting, going to grad school, and felt like I'm kind of in a spot right now where I'm not sure I want to start looking for a church because I'm just very, very busy. And so I found a church, and believe it or not, a Southern Baptist church. Because a lot of people don't know that Southern Baptist churches are autonomous.
Yeah,
they are. They're autonomous. They govern themselves. They're a part of a convention, is what it's called, but they're not responsible to any other body. And so Southern Baptist churches are pretty diverse in terms of whether they're conservative or moderate or liberal, progressive, And I found this church in the heart of downtown Birmingham, Alabama, that was really pretty progressive. And you'll agree when I tell you about my first experience attending this church. Well, two. One is I showed up to Sunday school to discover that I was the only single straight male in the class.
Wow.
The only other straight males in the class were married. All the other men in the class were gay, openly gay. And they were accepted into this church. And at the time...
It's a long way from where you came from.
Yes, that blew my mind. Not only that, but, and this is where I started reading John Shelby Spong, is that was what they were using as their Sunday school material, was his book, Rescuing the Bible from Fundamentalism. The other thing that kind of threw me was, and other denominations don't have problems with this, but again, this is the Southern Baptist Church. I introduced myself to the pastor, and the first thing he did was invited me out for a beer.
Wow.
And
yeah, I would have run.
I was flabbergasted. I paused for a minute because I did not know what to say to him. And so I said, okay. Well, okay. So I met him for a beer, And
was that your first beer?
It wasn't. I had been kind of over that time period after I had left that full-time church and gone through the divorce, started to drink like a glass of wine when I had a meal on occasion, not often, but on occasion. And, of course, I would go back to the Bible and say, well, Jesus turned water into wine, so
Sure.
It can't be all that bad.
Can't be bad.
Yeah. So, yeah, but that was probably the first time that I can remember anyway having a beer.
Yeah. With a
and
pastor.
it was with the Southern Baptist pastor. So that was an interesting experience in and of itself. But that was how it all started. And I just started reading, and becoming, kind of evolving my faith to becoming a more moderate Christian and eventually a very progressive Christian. But what happened, Rich, is that I finished graduate school and needed a full-time job. And it was through that process that I also decided, you know what? I think I really like this counseling stuff. I had started working a year before I graduated in a local psychiatric hospital and was doing a lot of counseling. Had to do an internship and all that. And I felt like, I love this. This is really cool. I'm helping people. So I had decided that I thought, maybe what I need to do is my career is going to be as a bivocational minister. I'm going to have a full-time career as a therapist, but on the side, part-time, I'm going to serve churches, and I'll serve smaller churches that need someone to come in who's not going to act like they're a part-time minister, because I can't do that.
Right.
So that's what I decided. So I found I needed a job. I found this job in Memphis, Tennessee. Took off, moved to Memphis, started working, and immediately started looking for a church and found one. And so I became the part-time minister of music at this, small church there in Memphis. And was there for, 2 years, year and a half, maybe. I think it was about a year and a half when I got recruited by a program in Charleston, South Carolina, to come there as a therapist. And so I did. And when I left that church in Memphis, it was tough because while I was at that church, I had already become very progressive, but this is still the South. It's still Memphis, it's Memphis, Tennessee, still a very conservative, place, but I wasn't very conservative anymore. And so I found myself feeling like a hypocrite, and going through the motions a lot. So I really started to struggle with that, but I hadn't given up my belief in God yet. I still very much felt like I was a Christian. I just wasn't the same kind of Christian anymore. And so when I left and moved to Charleston, I made a conscious decision that I just can't do it anymore. At least not right now. There would have to be some really unique circumstances, and it would have to be a church like the one that I was, going to in Birmingham, that was very progressive in its thinking. It would have, and there aren't many of them. So I just didn't look anymore. So I have not served in a church as a minister since 1998 when I left Memphis. And really what ended up happening is where I kind of sat philosophically and, with my faith and everything, just kind of remained a little stagnant at the time. I don't think I realized it then. Looking back on it, and it makes sense that I would be able to think this way now, considering the business I'm in. But I think subconsciously, what was happening is that I sensed where I was headed, that I had made such a transition from being this really, really conservative Southern Baptist minister to being a really progressive thinking Southern Baptist minister, And I was getting a little nervous about where I was headed with that, I think. And I think that's what made me kind of stall at that time. And so it wasn't until I moved to Seattle, to Tacoma, up here to the Pacific Northwest in 2001, that I got out of being stagnant and started to read some more and really explore my faith. Part of that was because, and I left this out. Another very important part of my story, right, was that while I was in Memphis, I met my current wife, and we dated for a year. We were engaged for a year and got married in 2000 while we lived in Charleston. And again, that was another thing that changed. This is something that would not happen before, right. But when she and I got together, we lived together, So that was probably another factor in not looking for a church, because they probably frown on that, me living in sin, Yeah. So we were married, and we moved here together. She was raised Catholic, so that was another thing. At the time, I wouldn't even date somebody that was, not seriously anyway, somebody who had, very significant differences in their beliefs at that time. But, she was like, in my experience, a lot of Catholics, in that she wasn't really a practicing Catholic, and didn't really know very much about her own faith. So it didn't get in the way at all. And what happened was when we moved here, and then in about 2002, when we said, okay, I think we're ready to start we want to have a family, we want to have kids. Then by 2003, when our son was born, it came back up about attending church and finding a church. And I was hiding, even then, I think, from my wife, my inner turmoil, because the person that she met was a Southern Baptist minister. Yeah. That's when we met. And that's not where I was anymore. And I was nervous about sharing that with her. I think I was also struggling with, well, what am I going to share? Because I don't even know where I am right now. So it was a period, Rich, of probably 10 years of this evolutionary process of my exploring my own beliefs and values and reading everything that I could, and then being in denial about it. And I think part of that is because, psychologically, we avoid things painful to us. And people resort to some very drastic measures in order to avoid that pain. Some people resort to alcohol. Some people resort to drugs. Some people resort to sex, gambling, shopping. I mean, people resort to all kinds of things to try to self-medicate and to avoid pain in their life. And I think I was avoiding this evolving realization. And I was getting very depressed about it. And it's, it did affect me in my work, in my studies. It was hard to stay motivated a lot because I was a little preoccupied.
Yeah.
But then what happened was in about 2007, 2008, I started reading people like Daniel Dennett. And, Breaking the Spell.
Breaking the Spell is an amazing book.
Yes, it is. I started reading, Victor Stenger, and, renowned physicist. I started reading Richard Dawkins, Christopher Hitchens, Sam Harris. I started reading.
And it made so much sense.
And everything just started coming into place with me. And I literally one night, and I'm not making this up, one night, I'm lying in bed next to my wife, and I'm finishing Sam Harris's book, The End of Faith. The End of Faith. Okay. How how apropos is that? So I literally finish the book, close it, sit it over on my nightstand, roll over and say, "Sweetie, there's something I need to tell you." And she, of course, goes, "Okay." She's like, because, she could tell this is something serious, right?
Yeah.
And it was tough, But I told her, I said, "I need to let you know that I no longer believe in God."
And she probably wasn't surprised.
She was surprised.
Was she?
That's how well I had been kind of hiding it. Now, she knew what I was reading. I wasn't hiding that. But we never talked about what I was reading. I never talked about it. She never asked about it. And she cried. But the thing about it is that I said it. But I don't think I even needed to say it. She knew that it didn't change anything. It didn't change anything about how I feel about her. And clearly it didn't change how she felt about me. And it didn't change anything about who I am as a person. I'm the same person.
Same guy you were, yeah.
Really, fundamentally, I'm the exact same person that she met when I was still a believer and a minister. So I think the initial shock of it was hard, but then what happened was I started to allow myself to actually get to know other people who also had given up their faith or who had never even had a faith, and more open about talking about it. And so she's still not at the same place that I'm at. At least she hasn't said so. I think she's still holding on to, the belief in God, and that's okay. Because you know what? I get it.
If anyone does,
I get it. I really do. And I don't, that's another thing. You remember earlier we talked about how, being gay is not a choice.
Right.
And you had said, well, like being an atheist, now that you're an atheist, that's not a choice either, is it?
That was never on your list of things to become.
No, it wasn't. And so, thinking about that, I want to say the same thing to people that gay teacher said to me. Why would I choose this? What people don't understand, and it blows my mind that they don't understand, and I think it's because it hasn't been framed for them in this way. I want to say to them, how would you feel? Now, really seriously, open your mind and allow yourself to just contemplate for a moment how you would feel if you woke up tomorrow and you realized that everything that your life has been about is a lie. How would you feel? And if they would really honestly think about that, I think it would give them at least some pause, about how they perceive atheists.
Right.
And, and why they become an atheist and give up their faith, because it was not easy at all. It was a struggle. It was a painful process, one that I resisted for several years. I didn't want to face it. I was in denial about it, and part of it was because there was this, I knew, I could feel it boiling up in me, that what would then set in was this resentment for, quite honestly, I think feeling like I've been duped, for the better part of my life.
Yeah. I totally remember that. Anger is a part of coming out. And one thing that I've had so many Christians say, you're just angry, you're just bitter. And I'm like, if your entire world melted down, you lost, in my case, physically lost everything I owned, lost who I was. Had to start from ground zero at 43 years old. And with a huge amount of emotional and mental baggage that required years of therapy, how would you feel? You probably would be angry too.
Oh, yeah.
You probably would be angry that someone had concocted these tales. And I guess what made it worse for me is the people further up in the organization knew it. And that to me was unconscionable, that people willingly, knowingly, they had realized, okay, there are holes in this stuff, but we're making money on this. So let's just stay on the gravy train. And I think that fueled my anger a bit. But when I see people beating up someone and not physically beating up, but pounding them with scriptures and telling them what a loser they are because they've said, I can't believe this anymore, I still get angry.
Yeah.
I still want to say, if you could, just like you explained, if you could just think long enough to realize where this person is, this isn't what they asked to do. They never sat down on their list of things. Okay, I'm going to pastor a church 20 years. I'm going to melt that sucker down when I realize it's a cult. I'm going to become an atheist. I'm going to lose my family. I'm going to, that's not the way you map it out.
It isn't at all. And, and I can empathize with you as, and because I understand we have a shared experience, but that shared experience only goes so far, you know? And, I feel a lot of pain for others, people like you, Rich, that suffered greater losses than I have with, making this transition in their faith and giving up their faith. Part of that is because, I have, and this is the way I frame it now, I've made my meaning in life. I've made my purpose in life now. I've decided what my purpose in life is, and it is, multifaceted. It's to be the best father, the best, husband, the best friend that I possibly can, but vocationally, it's to help people, to really try to help people. And in my particular area, to help people that most people don't want to help. So the thing about it is that, that shared experience causes me to then feel like I want to try to do something to even help others who are going through this experience or who have gone through this experience.
This has been a fascinating discussion. I want to have you back because you bring a wealth of knowledge and information and understanding. And would you agree to do that? Come back, because we have specific questions, and what I'd really like to do, I get a lot of psychology-based questions. I'm not a psychologist, not a counselor, never billed myself as that. And what I've been telling people is you need to find someone. But I would love to take a stack of those emails and say, we're going to throw these at the pro and just let you tear them up.
I would love to, yeah. I'll come back anytime you'd like.
We're going to do that. We've been talking with Robert Parham. He is a fascinating gentleman, as you realize, and an atheist.
Thank you,
a
Rich.
Good atheist. Thanks for joining us.
You're welcome.
So that was it. It was really, really touching and intimate, and I'm so glad that we got to get this one out. A couple of things that Robert mentioned. One was starting a support group. Now, this was before we were affiliated with Recovering from Religion.
Didn't even know they were out there.
We didn't know they existed. All we knew is that some of our friends in Tacoma did a little thing they called the support group.
It was just a meetup.
It was just a meetup.
But very effective.
A very effective one. A lot of people got together and they shared kind of their deconversion experiences. So now, of course, we've got this fabulous organization, Recovery from Religion, who has a whole network of meetings all over the place. And I want to stress that if there isn't one in your area, you don't have to be a psychologist like Robert to start up a support group for people to get together. You, in your damaged, imperfect, painful place, can go, hey, anybody want to go have some coffee and talk about what's going on? Because there's nothing official about it. You don't have to be an expert of any kind. You can just kind of start that up, and, having that little bit of companionship can really be a lifesaver for a lot of people.
And that's very literal, as we have just heard in the episode before us. Robert's an amazing guy. One of the things I can say now that we couldn't say back then, he's involved with the Clergy Project. And at that point, we couldn't even mention the Clergy Project. It was so undercover that before you were recruited for it, before anyone said anything to you, you were pretty well vetted. I mean, they knew who you were, they knew, and quietly they would approach you because the sensitive nature. I mean, people who are earning their living behind a pulpit who no longer believe. And I can't say enough about what the Clergy Project is doing to help ministers, and glad that it's out in the open now. The people are still behind a shroud of secrecy, as they should be. And I totally respect that, appreciate that. And anything you can do to support the Clergy Project is something that will help not just the people involved, but families. And ultimately, that's going to be a place where a lot of things change. As ministers, there are now hundreds involved in the Clergy Project. As ministers find a way to transition away from making their living behind a pulpit and find a way to openly explain their story, how they came out, why they came out. The more of those stories, we all know when Dan Barker came out with his change in his life, the incredible impact it had. There are hundreds of people who have just as much to say, and it's going to change a lot of things in the world we live in.
Absolutely. I'm Deanna Joy Lyons.
I'm Rich Lyons.
Come laugh with me.
You've been listening to the Living After Faith podcast, the official podcast of recoveringfromreligion.org. The music in this episode is Rosecross by Morrison's Prophecy. You can follow on Twitter at LAF with me, like Living After Faith on Facebook, or go to livingafterfaith.com. Thank you for listening to Living After Faith.